The 5 German shepherds moved as one organism, and the moment they did, the entire South Concourse of Chicago Union Station held its breath. It began with the lead dog, an enormous male named Shadow, black-coated and dense with muscle, belonging to the TSA's Great Lakes K-9 Interdiction Unit. Shadow had been executing a routine sweep of the departures hall when something in the air above Gate 14 stopped him cold. His nose lifted, his amber eyes locked onto a figure moving through the crowd 40 yards away. A young woman with a military surplus backpack slung over one shoulder, moving at a deliberate, unhurried pace through a sea of Friday afternoon commuters. Shadow didn't sit, he didn't bark. He emitted a low, continuous vibration from deep in his chest, a sound that his handler, Officer Damien Trowell, had never once heard the dog produce in 4 years of active duty together. Shadow, heal. Shadow did not heal. What followed happened in under 90 seconds, and every camera in Union Station caught it. 30 feet to Trowell's left, a female shepherd belonging to the Chicago Transit Authority's bomb disposal unit lunged forward so violently that her handler stumbled into a coffee kiosk, scattering cups across the terrazzo. To the right, near the Amtrak ticketing counters, 2 massive Belgian Malinois from a federal transit security detail abandoned their handlers with identical, terrifying purposefulness. A 5th dog, a compact, battle-hardened Dutch shepherd assigned to the Illinois State Police, dragged his officer physically backward along the floor before the leash snapped taut against a luggage rack. 5 highly trained, fully certified law enforcement animals from 3 separate jurisdictions converged on the same point. The young woman in the center of the concourse stopped walking. Her name was Imogen Carver. She was 29 years old. She had a duffel bag over her right shoulder and a small olive-green backpack that clinked faintly when she moved, and she was trying very hard to make it to Track 8 before the 4:15 Amtrak to Indianapolis departed without her. She was not carrying explosives. She was not a criminal. She was a former United States Navy petty officer first class who had spent 8 years as a military working dog handler attached to Naval Special Warfare Support Operations, who had deployed 3 times to the Middle East, who had once written a classified K-9 tactical manual in a forward operating base outside Kandahar by the light of a headlamp, and who had not spoken to her father in 6 years, 4 months, and 11 days. She felt the change before she saw it. Imogen had spent enough time in combat environments to recognize the specific quality of silence that precedes violence. Not the absence of sound, but the compression of it, everything going dense and pressurized right before something breaks. She felt that now, in the middle of a civilian train station, surrounded by businessmen and weekend travelers, and she turned slowly. 5 dogs, 5 handlers fighting losing battles against their own partners, a gathering semicircle of stunned bystanders, cell phones rising in a wave. The fear response in her nervous system activated, and then, almost immediately, was overridden by something colder and more precise. She had trained for this, not for this exact situation. Nothing had trained her for this exact situation, but for the state of being the focal point of animal aggression, while remaining operationally functional. She breathed out through her nose. Her pulse, which had spiked hard, dropped back down within seconds. "Ma'am, do not move." Officer Trowell's voice was controlled, but his face was not. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, experienced, and he was barely managing to hold Shadow with both hands and all his body weight. "Keep your hands where I can see them and do not move." Imogen raised her hands slowly. She did not look at the handlers. She looked at the dogs. Shadow was at what she would have called 12 o'clock. Directly in front of her, 8 feet away and closing. 2 of the Malinois had flanked her at 9 and 7. The shepherd had claimed the right side at 3 and 5. The Dutch shepherd was behind her, sealing the 6. Imogen's breath caught. She knew that formation. It was not a standard police apprehension posture. It was not a drug or explosive indication stance. The spacing was too precise, the lateral geometry too deliberate. Each dog not driving straight toward her, but cutting off angles, eliminating escape corridors, boxing her in rather than rushing her. It was a sentinel arc. She had designed the sentinel arc. Not designed it entirely, she had built on an existing framework, expanded it, formalized it into a 7-page classified operational guide she wrote at the request of her commanding officer in 2019. The Sentinel Arc was a multi-dog containment formation intended for high-value suspects in open civilian terrain, used exclusively by Tier 1 support K9 units. The core principle was that a pack of properly conditioned military working dogs, given a single shared scent trigger, could execute a coordinated perimeter hold without direct handler command. It kept handlers out of the kill zone while maintaining complete containment. It was not supposed to exist in any domestic transit security context. The dogs were executing it flawlessly. "Officer," her voice came out level, which surprised even her. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not release your dog. If you release him, you are going to lose him. Hands on your head." "I'm not a threat." She kept her eyes on Shadow. "I'm a former K9 handler. These dogs are not attacking me. They are executing a specialized containment protocol, and I need you to give me 30 seconds to explain why before this situation becomes something nobody can walk back from." "Who are you?" said a woman's voice from the far edge of the circle. Captain Yolanda Cruz pushed through the ring of stunned onlookers with the bearing of someone who had spent 15 years not being surprised by anything that happened in a transit hub. Silver-streaked hair, dark uniform, eyes that were doing rapid, careful calculations. She looked at the 5 dogs. She looked at the single calm young woman standing in the center of the formation. She looked surprised. "My name is Imogen Carver," Imogen said, both hands still raised. "Petty Officer First Class, retired. I served as a military working dog handler with Naval Special Warfare Support for 8 years. I last worked out of the Lackland Air Force Base, Joint Tactical K9 Training Facility." The name Lackland landed like a stone in still water. Cruz's expression shifted, not softening exactly, but recalibrating. "These dogs," Imogen continued, "are executing an adapted version of a classified containment formation I helped develop at Lackland in 2019. I don't know how they were trained to use it outside a Tier 1 context, but I know exactly why they're using it on me right now." She paused. "Can I reach into my backpack?" Every handler in the circle tensed. Shadow's growl dropped an octave. "Slowly," Cruz said. Imogen unzipped the olive-green backpack with 2 fingers. She reached in and withdrew a worn leather harness, old, dark with age and use. The brass fittings gone green at the edges, the webbing stained in places with oil and dried clay and things she had never tried to wash out, because washing them out had felt like losing something she couldn't afford to lose. She held it up. The effect was instantaneous. Shadow's growl cut off like a switch had been thrown. The massive dog went silent, his head dropping slightly, his amber eyes fixed on the harness with an expression that was not aggression and not fear, but something Imogen recognized as recognition. Beside her, the 2 Malinois on her left made a sound she had only ever heard from dogs in the presence of their own dead, a soft, involuntary whine, nearly subsonic, heartbreaking in its smallness. "This belonged to Onyx," Imogen said, her voice held on the name barely. "Belgian Malinois. Military working dog, retired with distinction after 3 deployments. He was my partner for 6 years. He passed away 7 years ago." She lowered the harness carefully and held it against her chest. Before he died, Onyx was selected for the Naval Special Warfare breeding program at Lackland. He sired 2 litters. The government used his genetic line to populate elite domestic K9 units across the Midwest. I didn't know those units had ended up here. She looked at Shadow, then at each dog in the formation one by one. But they did, and they know what they're smelling. The silence in the south concourse of Union Station was absolute. Around the loose perimeter of gathered onlookers, people stood with phones half-raised, recording, but no longer certain what they were watching. Cruz stepped close enough to speak quietly. "You're saying these dogs recognize a scent?" "More than recognize." Onyx was alpha-conditioned as a protocol sire, which means his handlers, including me, used specific pheromonal reinforcement during his training so that his behavioral markers would pass to his offspring. This harness is saturated with his scent and mine. To these dogs, she gestured at the 5. This is their genetic founding line, walking into their territory. They defaulted to the Sentinel arc because it's the most sophisticated behavioral protocol in their conditioning set. They're not attacking me. They're containing the space for me, waiting for a command from the apex handler. Officer Trowell stared at her. "That's not possible. They've never seen you before in their lives." "They haven't, but their instincts have." She watched Shadow. The big dog had settled onto his haunches, body still coiled with energy but jaw closed, his gaze fixed on Imogen with an intensity that was no longer hostile. The same way a child who's never met their grandmother can still smell something familiar in an old photograph, except dogs don't need the photograph, they carry the original. Cruz looked at Shadow, she looked at the harness, a muscle worked in her jaw. "Secure your leads," she told her handlers, voice flat and deliberate. "Gentle handling. Do not engage." She turned back to Imogen. "You want to tell me what you're doing in my station today?" "I'm trying to catch a 4:15 train. My father is in a hospital in Indianapolis. He had a stroke 3 days ago." She held Cruz's gaze. "They don't think he'll make it past the weekend." Something in the captain's posture shifted. Still professional, still guarded, but fractionally less sharp at the edges. "The two of you are estranged." The word came out flat and practiced, worn smooth by repetition. "We haven't spoken since I re-enlisted. He wanted me to come home. I kept thinking there'd be more time to explain why I couldn't." Cruz studied her for a long moment. Then she reached into her breast pocket and produced a card. "We'll need a statement for the incident report." She glanced at the 5 dogs, still held in their loose formation by handlers who looked like they weren't sure whether to be embarrassed or awed. In the mean, Shadow moved. Not toward Imogen, sideways, hard to his left, nose dropping to the floor, body going rigid in a posture that was entirely different from the formation he'd been holding. His tail dropped, his ears pinned flat. He took 2 hard, purposeful steps toward the far end of the concourse, toward the corridor leading down to the station's lower level, the baggage handling area, the maintenance tunnels beneath Track 6, and then stopped, vibrating. Imogen felt the air shift. She had spent 6 years reading Onyx, 6 years learning to feel the change in a dog's body before her own brain could process what his nose already knew. She looked at Shadow, and she understood, with the same cold certainty she'd felt in 3 different countries with a rifle on her back, that the dog was no longer reacting to her. "Captain." Her voice dropped, the lightness gone entirely. "Your dog isn't looking at me." Cruz turned, her face went still. "Trowell, what is he?" "He's on something," Trowell said, and he sounded different now, less like a shaken handler and more like a professional reading his partner in real time. "He's fully locked in. That's his complete indication posture for secondary volatiles. That is not narcotics." "Precursor chemicals," Imogen said quietly. The word fell into the concourse like something dropped from a height. Cruz turned to her. "How certain are you?" "I'm not. Your dog is." Cruz made her decision in under 2 seconds. "Trowell, is he locked?" "He is locked, Captain." "What's down that corridor?" Imogen asked. "Subterranean baggage level. Maintenance tunnels for tracks 4 through 7. Chicago police has a secured evidence convoy moving through the lower level today, seized materials from a major narcotics operation. We've been running surface sweeps up here, to ensure the transit corridor isn't being observed. Imogen looked at the corridor entrance, dark. Still, the kind of quiet that meant someone had deliberately made it quiet. "If you sound a full evacuation alarm," she said carefully, "whoever is in that corridor will know they've been identified. If they have a device assembled, and if those chemical signatures are what Shadow thinks they are, they will trigger it before your people can reach the lower level." Cruz held her gaze for 3 full seconds. "You're saying the dogs already found it?" "I'm saying they don't need a SWAT team. They need someone they'll follow." Imogen extended the back of her hand toward Shadow. The big dog pressed his nose against her knuckles with a gentleness that was almost shocking in an animal built for violence. His tail moved once, slow and deliberate. "Do I have your authorization?" Imogen asked. The pause lasted 3 seconds. "You have it." What followed was nothing like the stories. There were no dramatic sprints, no shouted commands, no tactical lights cutting through steam-filled corridors. There was only a former Navy handler in civilian clothes, with an old leather harness over her shoulder, and 5 military working dogs moving like dark water through the lower level of Chicago Union Station. Imogen kept her breathing steady and her footfalls quiet. She communicated with the dogs entirely in hand signals, the same signals embedded in their training architecture, the same language Onyx had learned in a sun-baked yard at Lackland. Shadow moved at her left knee, the 2 Malinois spread wide on her flanks. The shepherd and the Dutch shepherd held the rear. Behind them, at a careful distance, Cruz and 4 officers followed without speaking. The maintenance corridor was long and low-ceilinged, lit by amber emergency lighting that turned everything the color of old photographs. The chemical smell hit Imogen first. Faint, sharp, synthetic, wrong in a way that her body recognized before her mind could name it. She raised a fist, and the formation stopped. Shadow's nose was working in tight, rapid pulls. He dropped low, belly nearly brushing the concrete, and moved in a slow leftward arc toward a steel utility door set beside a bank of electrical conduits. Imogen crouched beside him. She put her hand flat on his back and felt the rapid, contained trembling of a dog who had found exactly what he had been searching for and was waiting, with everything he had, to be told what to do next. She looked back at Cruz and held up 2 fingers pointed at the door. Cruz relayed it silently to her officers. Behind the steel door, there were voices, low, clipped, focused, the voices of people working against a timeline they had set themselves. What happened next took 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Imogen did not think of it in those terms until she gave her formal statement later. In the moment, it was only a sequence of precise physical actions, Cruz's officers stacking on the door, the signal, the breach. Shadow going through the opening like something released rather than commanded, because the door opened and the scent that had been driving him for the past 20 minutes was suddenly right there, close and real and overwhelming. There were 2 of them, 1 dove for a device half assembled on a folding table. He didn't reach it. Shadow hit him before his fingers made contact, 90 pounds of absolute conviction separating the man from the table in a single violent impact. The device skidded sideways. The man went the other way entirely. The second figure tried for the corridor exit and met both Malinois in the dark. Cruz was on the radio before the echo of the breach had faded. Imogen stood back against the wall and watched the dogs work, the controlled aggression, the precise economy of it, 5 animals doing exactly what they had been built to do, and she thought, involuntarily, and with a grief that never fully went away, about Onyx. He had been small for a Malinois. That was always the first thing people said when they saw him. Small and wiry and absurdly fast, with enormous amber eyes and a habit of sleeping with his chin on Imogen's ankle when she worked late, a habit she'd spent 3 months trying to break before she accepted it as the finest compliment she had ever been paid by anyone or anything. She had been stationed in Bahrain when he died. The notification came through secure channels at Iro 300, and she had sat with it in the dark of her quarters for a long time before she could make herself move. Her father had called when he found out. He had called, and she had let it go to voicemail, and when she finally listened to it 3 days later, his voice said, "I know you're probably not okay right now. I know you don't want to hear from me. I just wanted you to know that I know." She had never called him back. Shadow came and pressed the full weight of his right side against her leg, leaning into her the way dogs do when they have finished doing something hard and want the world to be still for a moment. His chest was heaving. She put her hand on top of his broad skull and felt his breathing slow, the vibrating urgency of the hunt ebbing out of him degree by degree. "Good boy," she said quietly. "You did so good." The hour that followed was controlled chaos of a specific, federal variety. Statements, bomb technicians in heavy suits, a cordon that expanded in careful rings until the south end of Union Station was sealed, and the platform loudspeaker was calmly announcing delays to every departure for the foreseeable future. Captain Cruz found Imogen sitting on a bench near Track 3, Shadow still leaning against her leg with a familiarity that made Trowell look at his own dog with a mildly wounded expression. "The 415 is grounded," Cruz said, "obviously, but there's an Amtrak operations vehicle heading to Indianapolis within the hour. Evidence transport from this scene. I can get you a seat." Imogen looked up. "You don't have to do that. You just helped my unit prevent a detonation inside a federally regulated transit corridor." Cruz's voice was dry. "You can have a seat in a van." Imogen exhaled. "Thank you." Cruz sat down beside her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Shadow's tail swept the concrete slowly back and forth. "He was a good dog," Cruz said finally. "Onyx." She said the name carefully, the way people say the names of the dead when they're aware of what the name carries. "He was the best dog I've ever known," Imogen said. "He always seemed to understand what I needed before I did. Whether that was alerting to a threat or just," she paused, "just staying close when things got dark." Cruz nodded once. "How long has it been since you saw your father?" 6 years. "He's going to want to know about today." Imogen looked down at the harness in her lap, at the green-tinted brass fittings, at the worn patch on the left shoulder strap where she'd had Onyx's service number embossed years ago in a moment of sentiment she'd never admitted to anyone. "He always said I cared more about my dogs than I did about anything else," she said. "He wasn't entirely wrong." She ran her thumb along the embossed numbers. "He was a firefighter for 32 years. He understood duty better than almost anyone I've ever met. He just couldn't understand why mine had to keep taking me so far away from him." The operations van left Union Station at 5:05. It arrived at Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis at 8:44 in the evening. Imogen was met in the lobby by a nurse who told her, in the careful, measured cadence that hospital staff use for serious information, that Morris Carver had been moved from the ICU to a private room 2 hours earlier, that he was conscious but weak, and that he had asked twice whether his daughter had called. Room 317 was quiet. The monitors beeped in a low, patient rhythm. The window showed the Indianapolis skyline, a modest scatter of lit towers against the dark. Morris Carver was smaller than she remembered. That was the first thing she noticed. He had been a large man, a firefighter's build, wide across the shoulders, the kind of physical presence that made a room feel accounted for. The man in the hospital bed still had that structure, but diminished somehow, like a house that was still standing, but had been emptied of most of what had made it a home. His eyes were open when she came in. They found her immediately. "Imogen," he said. His voice was thin, but the quality in it was not. She crossed the room without speaking and sat in the chair beside the bed. The chair had a rounded back and a thin cushion, and it was, she understood immediately and completely, the most important chair she had ever occupied. She set Onyx's harness on the small table to her right. Her father looked at the harness. He looked at her. "You made it," he said. "I made it." His hand moved across the blanket toward her, slow, deliberate, effortful. She met it halfway and held it, his large, scarred firefighter's hand closing around hers with a grip that was weaker than she'd expected and stronger than she had feared. Neither of them spoke for a while. The monitors kept their patient rhythm. Through the window, the city went about its Friday night without them. "Was the trip all right?" he asked finally. She thought about the concourse, 5 dogs executing a formation she had written in a forward operating base and never expected to encounter again. Shadow's nose finding something lethal in a darkened corridor, the breach and what followed it, and the way the dogs had come back to her after. It was eventful, she said. Something moved in her father's face, the edge of a smile, old and familiar. "That sounds like you." "Sounds a little like you too," she said, the part that didn't stay home when things got hard. He was quiet for a moment. His thumb moved slowly across the back of her hand. "I was wrong to ask you to." The words were simple, and they were enormous, and he said them the way a person says something they have been carrying for a very long time, and are finally, cautiously, setting down. Imogen looked at his hand in hers, at the scars from 32 years of running toward fires, at the monitor drawing its steady green line across the dark screen above his bed. "I know," she said. "Me too." Later, much later, when the nurse had come and gone, and the corridor lights had shifted to their nighttime setting, and her father's breathing had deepened into sleep, Imogen sat in the thin-cushioned chair, with one hand resting lightly on Onyx's old harness. Through the window, a plane moved silently across the Indianapolis sky, trailing its small, steady lights toward somewhere distant and specific. She watched it until it disappeared. Onyx had always known, before she did, when something was wrong, and he had always known, before she did, when something was finally going to be all right. She thought maybe that knowledge had not died with him. She thought maybe it had simply found a new set of eyes to travel through, amber and watchful and patient, waiting for her to be ready to receive it. She held the harness a little tighter, and she let herself believe that.